Thanks for joining our March webinar. My name is Natalie, and today Anne and I will present tips to use Info Explorer more efficiently. Info Explorer is one of the few Orchid modules that is not specific to Sage 300. It's a powerful and affordable business intelligence tool to analyze data and also supports budgeting. We often describe it as pivot table integrated with Sage 300 and other data. It's been around for many years and is widely used with Sage 300 and other products. You can use all the sample demo cubes with Info Explorer Lite, the free version. It's a great way to start seeing the cubes on your own data. The core of Info Explorer is analyzing data in multi-dimensional cubes, and today we will focus on common features to make the cubes more powerful and personalized. You can also use Info Explorer right back for budgeting and forecasting. And this was a topic of previous webinar last year, so we won't cover that in this presentation today. This webinar coincides with the forthcoming release of Info Explorer 64-bit. Although there are no major new user features in that release, it means that you will be able to run larger cubes successfully, and you won't get the 4 GB memory limitation. And also the install paths have been updated to reflect that. To get started with Info Explorer, we recommend that you watch the quick start video, which includes detailed presentation on how to download, install, and start using the sample cubes connected to your data and start analyzing your own data. You can also use Info Explorer with other Orchid modules. In this presentation, we will look at using Process Scheduler to refresh and email cubes unattended. In addition, Data Views is a useful little add-on if you're using optional fields and SQL views in the queries, as it makes reporting with optional fields easier. We will not cover budgeting with Info Explorer in this webinar. There are several video presentations on using Info Explorer and optional table for budgeting and forecasting, including budgeting at the GL and transaction optional field level, for example, a project that may not be in your chart of accounts, but that you want to report and budget on. And this is often used to help use Sage 300 for multi-dimensional accounting. The focus of the presentation today is on tips to use Info Explorer to analyze data. We will cover filtering and sorting, drill down, adding calculation, using stars, dashboards. And for this, I will hand over to Anne to take us through the analysis tips.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm going to give you some tips on filtering and sorting using Info Explorer. For filtering, there are 3 different ways you can filter the data you're seeing, either by selecting a particular dimension value, or you can pre-filter the underlying records, or you can filter on a calculated fact. And for sorting, you can either sort your data by dimension value or by fact. Using this AP Purchases by GL account multi-company cube, just to give you an overview of what data I have data across 2 companies, Orc Ltd and Orc Inc. 2, and I'm seeing my AP purchases by vendor, also by account code, and we have grouped the GL accounts into region and division where appropriate. So if I expand my Orc Limited, I can see the amounts posted to no division, to the commercial division and the retail division. And in Orc Inc. 2, similarly, I can see the amounts posted to no division, commercial division and retail division. In order to filter on a dimension, if the dimension only has a handful of values, like company and region, then you can just click on the filter icon on the top of the division, and let's just say we only want to see the amounts posted to commercial and retail, so we can say only for 100 and 200. And then perhaps for company, if we only wanted to show Orc Limited or Orc Inc. 2, we could select the individual company. So this is very useful when you only have a handful of entries in that particular dimension. Another one that's a good example for filtering by dimension value is fiscal year. So here, if we click on the fiscal year, we can see we're already filtering and we're only looking at 2021, 2022, and 2020. And if we wanted only 2023's data, we could select that way as well. But this sort of filtering is not so useful when you have longer dimension values. So let's just go back and look at all our companies, all our divisions, and all our fiscal years. And now we can see if we want to filter on our vendor dimension, and depending on how many vendors you have, it's quite awkward finding the particular dimension value that you want. So the second way that you can filter by dimension value is using what we call a pre-filter. And a pre-filter allows you to filter the underlying records. So if I apply a pre-filter, and I can have a number of different and or conditions for the filter, but I could say vendor equals and then select the vendor this way. So now I'm saying I'm only going to see the information for vendor 1200, and this sort of pre-filter shows here. So we can select and deselect the pre-filter on the view itself. Or we could say, let's see, vendor equals 1200 and add multiple conditions where we can select by vendor or any of the other dimension values. And if you've got multiple conditions, you must say all must be true, at least one must be true. So whether you're doing an and or an or. So let's say at least one condition must be true. So we're going to say vendor equals 1200 or vendor equals 1400 or vendor equals 4540. And now we get the three vendors, and you can see the condition that is built up here, and can be turned on and off by selecting the tick box beside the filter condition on the particular view. So a pre-filter is happening on the underlying data records and not on a calculated field. If we were to filter on the amount excluding tax being greater than 15,000, for example, that would mean we are filtering for an individual record, an individual invoice coded to a GL account being greater than 15,000. So we would not see vendor 1200 maybe, we would only see vendors where an individual invoice was greater than 15,000. So let's just apply that filter, and you'll see there's only two vendors where an individual invoice line amount is greater than 15,000. And if we drill into those particular details, we will see the individual invoice. And the third type of filtering allows you to filter on a view on calculated values. So in this example, I'm looking at my total spend with vendors for the year 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. And if I wanted to show all those vendors with whom we had spent more than $10,000, we need to decide, is that $10,000 in total, or is it $10,000 in any one year? And to apply such a filter, you select this filter icon at the bottom of the dimension value. So I am going to be filtering all my vendors where, and I can add as many conditions as I want. So here, do I want to check, is the grand total greater than 10,000, or any one particular year is greater than 10,000, or any one fiscal year, or every fiscal year? So I'm going to do any one fiscal year where the amount excluding tax is greater than $10,000. So this is based on the totals that the cube has calculated and is currently displaying. So now I'm only seeing vendors where in any one year the greater is $10,000. So it doesn't qualify for this year or this year, but it does for 2023 and for 2020. Similarly, these vendors qualify in the year 2020, and this vendor qualifies in the year 2022. And the applied totals filter is shown along the bottom. We have looked at the three different ways to filter data on a cube: by selecting the dimension values, by pre-filtering the underlying records, and by filtering using the calculated fact values. Now we're going to look at sorting. We can sort either by dimension value or by fact. To look at the sorting, we're still looking at our AP purchases by GL account across two companies, but this time I'm looking at my purchase GL account as my rows and my fiscal year as my columns. To sort by dimension value, you can select this arrow on the dimension name, so you can only sort by the visible dimensions. So if I click on this arrow, it's going to sort my purchase GL account descending or ascending based on the visible accounts. And I can also sort my years ascending as it currently is, or descending. So now 2023 is the first year going back to 2020. So for your visible dimensions, you click on the arrow to change the sort method. And to sort by dimension value, I could either sort my purchase accounts by dimension value in 2020, 2021, etc., or I could do it by total. So if I want to sort my purchase GL account by the total amount of the spend, I can right-hand mouse button on the column header and say sort purchase GL account by this column. And initially it will sort it ascending. So these are my GL accounts ascending by value in total. And if I change my filter on the purchase account now, it's now going to be showing me sorted in total but descending. So my largest account is 6561-2, rent for the warehouse. We have seen how to filter and sort our data. And as a reminder, you can find this information in our online help. Using Info Explorer, you can view more information than the standard views in the cube you have. In one of your views, you can drill down into the cube to the underlying transactions that make up the totals that you're currently viewing. Depending on the configuration of the cube, you can also drill down through to the Sage 300 transaction or in master file inquiry screen if the cube has been configured accordingly. And if you understand the underlying data structures, you can add extra columns to your cube if required. And we have a knowledge base article and video on advanced SQL tips when using Info Explorer. Looking first at the drill down within a cube, if you're looking at any particular total, you can right-hand mouse button and drill down, and this will take you into the underlying transactions that make up that particular total. So this 56,599.63 is made up of all these invoices in Orc Inc. 2 and Orc Limited. And should you need this data in Excel, for example, you can click Ctrl-C to copy the contents to your clipboard, and then once you're in Excel, Ctrl-V to paste the information into Excel. And if we were to drill into just one of the GL accounts, this one for example, right-hand mouse button and drill down, and there's only one invoice that makes up that particular total. So clicking right-hand mouse button on a total and selecting drill down will take you to the underlying records that make up that particular total, which is different to the drill through. So depending on your cube configuration, if we look perhaps at this particular account number, the utilities total. If we expand to see what vendors are involved, expand to see what documents are involved. Now if you right-hand mouse button on this particular amount, you can either drill down to see that individual invoice as it was brought into the cube, or right-hand mouse button and you can drill through to either the vendor activity, so that's Chloride Systems, or back to the AP invoice. So let's first look at the AP invoice. And if you haven't previously connected to your Sage 300 company, you'll be prompted to do so. And it's using your Sage credentials to open up the particular screen with that particular invoice in it. So this was invoice 1162023. And we can see all the details that were posted with that particular invoice. And if we right-hand mouse button and drill through to the vendor activity, it's going to open up the vendor activity in Orc Limited. And from here we have our normal functionality in terms of drill down and double click to open up the transactions. And just as I'm using drill down and drill through in my AP cube, I can do the same in GL or any subledger. So in General Ledger, for example, if I'm looking at my income statement, my accounts are grouped by account group. If I was to drag down the account number, and perhaps if this amount I wanted to investigate further, I could drag down the batch and entry number, and now right-hand mouse button, and this time I can drill through to the GL batch. So I can see what gave rise to that amount against my sales account. So that's for the drill through on a GL. But if I was to looking more at a summarized piece of information, we can still drill down and we'll see all the accounts that make up that balance of 10,197,038. And similarly, from an order entry style cube, if I was to be looking at my sales by customer and item, and if I was to look at this net sales figure, I could drill through to my AR customer activity and see the customer's activity right now. But if I needed information that was not part of my drill down into underlying transactions or drill through back into the Sage master files or transactions, then I can also amend the query. So I could go to the query builder for this cube and it would show me all the tables that are selected and the fields that are currently selected. And if one of the fields that I wanted to look at was in one of these tables, I could just turn them on. For example, I might want to include the postcode of the customer, and I could also drag in new tables and link them through and then choose fields off those tables. So if I've now included the postcode of the customer, next time I refresh, we've now got the postcode sitting here as well. So if we wanted to see the postcode of the customer, we can go ahead and see that. So we've now looked at 3 different ways we can add more information or look at more information in context of the cube that we're looking at. And if you go to our online help, you will find more information on drill through, drill down, and adding values to the SQL query. The next feature we're going to look at in Info Explorer is adding facts and formulas. So this enables you to add your own calculations in the cube. Firstly, you can change the aggregation method of a fact in the cube. So a fact is a number that is being returned by the SQL query. By default, your facts will be summed, but you can calculate the number of records in that fact, the minimum value, the maximum value, the average value, and a ranking. For example, your top 10 vendors or top 10 customers, top 10 items. You can also add a formula. So, for example, sales minus cost of sales equals margin. And you can display a sum as a percent variation across by your columns or by your rows, or a percentage of the total of the row or the column. For example, this vendor is 10% of the total purchases that month. And I'm going to show you some examples to calculate the top 10 vendors and also a percentage of the total and a margin percent. In this cube, I'm looking at my AP purchases by GL account across multiple companies, Orc Limited and Orc Inc. 2. And I'm currently looking at all my vendors, the total spend, the amount excluding tax, the tax amount, and the amount including tax. And if I go to the fields, I can see that the amount excluding tax, the tax amount, and the amount including tax is the sum of my field in the underlying table that I have extracted from my Sage 300 company database. So the field name is amount including tax. This is the caption. It is a fact, and we're currently looking at the sum of it, and it's summing the field amount including tax and displaying it in its default calculation. And that is the same for the amount excluding tax, tax amount, and amount including tax. So let me just simplify this view. So I'm getting rid of these two facts and putting them up in the available area as opposed to in the displayed area. So now I'm looking at my spend per company, per vendor, amount excluding tax. If I wanted to do a calculation on this amount excluding tax, I can click Create a New Fact. Give it a name. So I'm going to calculate the rank of my vendor's amount excluding tax. So instead of it being a sum, I'm going to make it a descending rank of my amount excluding tax. So these fields showing here are the raw data or the columns that have come in from the SQL query. And I'm going to display it as default. When I save that, you will see I now have my rank included. So it's ranking my vendors within Orc Limited, within Orc Inc. 2, and in total. And now I can use my sorting. So if I want to see my descended rank across all the companies, I can see that 7400 is my largest vendor. But in Orc Inc. 2, it's 17, and in Orc Limited, it's number 1. So your ranking or your calculations on top of the data is always with respect to the data that you're currently looking at. So if I was to associate, or if I was to group my vendors by group code, you can see it's now ranking my vendor within the group and then ranking the group within the total. So in a grouping for inventory where I have a handful of vendors, you can see it's ranking them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm still sorting based on the total. And my inventory group is the biggest within the total of all the groups. So the formulas you add are calculated and displayed relative to the data that you're currently viewing. I'm now ranking my vendor within the group code and the vendor group code within the company. And if I remove the group code, I'm ranking my vendor just within company. So just having a look at that rank again. In a similar way, we could add a calculation to show us the sum of the records, the number of records that make up that total, the distinct count, for example, of an invoice number to see how many invoices a vendor has, the minimum value, the maximum value, average value, ascending or descending rank, and calculate a formula itself. I'll show you the formula later. But we're going to add a new fact. This time it's going to be the percentage of column. It's going to be a fact, a sum of our amount excluding tax, and we're going to show this as a percent of the column value. So you can see this 7400 vendor, 87,000, is 41% of the total, 11% of the total, all the way down to 0.08% of the total. And this is for Orc Limited. Here, this 35,000 for chloride systems is 26% of the total. And if we look at the total of the two companies, we can see that 7400 is 25% of the total. So you can either add a percent of your column values, or depending on your display, you could add a percent of your row values. And here is another example of our percent of total. This time we're looking at our item and customer sales, and we've grouped our items by category, and we can see that the accessories is 96% of the total, the packaging is 3.88% of the total. Let's just filter on 2022 as it has better data. And we can see accessories is 8%, packaging is 7%, and executive desk chairs is 32%. So in the same way as we saw our vendors percent of the total, we're now seeing our item categories as the percentage of the total. And if we take our item number from the available area to the displayed area and make it a row, we can now see our percent of total of the item within the category. So 61% within accessories, 2% within accessories, as well as the accessories as a percent of the total. And in the same way, the percent of total was added on the net sales column. And here we can have a look at the margin percent formula. So margin percent is calculated in the cube, and it is shown as a formula, and it's saying if net sales value, so the net sales dot value is equal to 0, make the calculation 0. Otherwise, it's the margin dot value divided by the net sales dot value times by 100. And the totals are not summed, they are re-evaluated. So when you add a formula such as this, if we look at our margin percent, and let's just get rid of percentage of total to keep our view simple. So our margin percent is 60, 53, 58, and so on. But we can also recalculate the margin percent at a category level. So this is not the sum of these margin percents, but it's recalculated because on the field we said that the margin percent, the totals are re-evaluated. So if you don't say evaluated, then the totals would be summed up and you would just get a sum of all the margin percents in this total. We've had a look at ranking vendors, showing vendors as a percent of the total, and how to calculate margin percent. And just as a reminder, in our knowledge base, we have a number of examples on adding formulas and working with different types of facts in Info Explorer cubes. In this next section, we're going to look at how you can use styles to change the way data is displayed in a cube and to highlight exceptions or calculations that you have included in the cube. We're going to look at the difference between normal cells, total cells, and amended cells. And we're going to look at creating styles and applying them to either normal cells, total cells, or amended cells, or even conditionally based on the fact value. And we're going to also look at, if you've created a style and it's not in use, how to delete it. And the examples we're going to do is some traffic light reporting, how to round decimals, and how to highlight which budget figures have been amended. By default, when you have a cube, the underlying data will be shown in black writing on a white background, and totals will have a grey background, as we can see here. But you can apply different formatting to your cells, either by fact. So in this case, for our margin percent, we have applied traffic light reporting. If it's greater than 60, it is green. If it's between 50 and 60, it is orange. And if it's less than 50, it is red. So when you create a style, you have a choice whether you're applying it to your totals, to your data across the board, or to an individual fact. You create your styles in the Styles menu. And first you create all the styles that you want. So for example, our totals are this light grey. We have created a color which is called traffic light green, which is a green background with black writing, a red background with black writing, and an orange background with writing. To create a new style, you go ahead and create it, give it a name. For example, a particular style for our amended budget figures. You can change the font. We'll maybe make it blue. And the background color we'll make a light pink. So once you've created your styles, you now need to go and apply those styles to the cube in general or to a fact. So in the rules for this cube, you can define what your totals look like. So in this cube, our default totals is the total color, and it applies to total cells. We can create a new rule, and we could say we want to apply a default color to of our amended budget figures and apply only to our cells with amended workset data. Or we could apply something to our normal cells. So let's save that, create another style, and this one's going to be for our background, our general cells. And for this, we're just going to change the text color to a green. So there's the sample, so it's green on white. And if on our rules for the cube, we apply to our normal cells, so by default, we're going to apply the normal color to normal cells only. You can see all our cells are now green on a white background, unless it's totals, which it's still black on the grey background, and our margin percent has the traffic light reporting. To get the traffic light reporting, if we go and look at the margin percent, we can see it's got a style applied to it. And the rules for margin percent: if the value is less than 50, it's traffic light red. If the value is between 50 and 60, it is orange. And if the value is greater than 60, it is green. We could add another condition, create a new rule, and if it's a range from 60 or greater than 70, we can apply our new white on green background. We'll just apply that to our totals too. And this one we're going to change to between 60 and 70. And we've changed our traffic lighting, so if it's over 70, it's just white on green. And using our GL budget write-back cube as an example to see how we can apply a style to budgeted figures or amended budgeted figures. If we go to our detailed budget entry, and if, for example, I want to change my budget one figure from 27,000 to 37,000, on the work sets tab, my method, my updating at a total level, what method I'm using. So I'm going to say I'll change proportionately. So minus 37. So all the numbers that added up to the 27,000 is now being proportionally amended to add up to 37,000, and my number has gone pink. And that is because in our style we have applied the work set style, which is this pink on black. We applied that to our default amended work set data. So you can either apply a style which could be conditional, like our traffic light reporting, to an individual fact, and you can apply styles to your normal cells, total cells, and amended data cells. And while we're in the GL cube, we'll look at the display tab, which allows you to display the information rounded to the nearest 10, 100, or 1000, which is useful in GL cubes. So let's round to the nearest 1000, and we could remove the decimal points too by using a style. And all numbers except amended budget data is displayed without 2 decimal places. And to delete an unused style, you can just select the style and then hit the delete key to remove that particular style. So we've seen how to work with styles and apply them to normal cells, total cells, and amended cells, and how to do conditional formatting based on the fact value. And just a reminder, there's knowledge base articles and online help on working with styles. Now we're going to look at using dashboards. Can you have multiple dashboards? Can dashboards be interactive? You can have multiple dashboards, each with multiple views and graphs. And per dashboard, you can change the fields that are displayed in the dashboard view. You can change the dashboard size and the number of views that are included. You can add or swap views and charts onto the dashboard. You can use pre-filters on the views, and you can use filters on calculated facts. Using our existing AP purchases by GL account multi-company cube, we can see we already have one dashboard, which is currently showing us two graphs and two views of different sizes. On an existing dashboard, if you wanted to change the display, you could right-hand mouse button and show the available fields. If you want to change what your rows or columns are, you could show the columns or the row area and hide the tree. So if we show the row area, we now see the distribution code, and we can sort by distribution code, we can filter by distribution code, or change our rows and columns. We could also, if we wanted a different view, we could close this particular view and drag on another view. And if that view had a filter, a pre-filter, you can select and deselect it on the view as well. And you can change the size of your views. So instead of making it 1 by 1, we could make it wider to fill this gap. And now we could turn on our distribution codes that do not start with O. So now we'll see all of the ones that don't start with O are hidden, and now we'll see all our distribution codes. To create a new dashboard, you select New Dashboard. You can rename it. And by default, it has 3 rows and 3 columns. And now you can just drag any of your charts or views onto the dashboard. But if we wanted this one to be long and thin, we could right-hand mouse button, change the size, and make it 3 down. And then when we drag our another chart perhaps onto the top here, we could make this one too wide. Maybe we need to do a bit more depth as well. And drag our final view that we want to see onto the bottom. On an existing dashboard, you can change the row and columns by showing the column area and then selecting different columns, or showing the row area, selecting different values, or even showing the available fields and dragging them down as your row or column. You can change the size of your individual views on the dashboard, and if your dashboard has got a pre-filter or a values filter, it can still be selected on and off at the time in the dashboard. So we've reviewed some of the functionality that you have on dashboards, and as a reminder, we have KB articles and online help giving you more information on working with dashboards. Back to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Anne. We're now looking at how we can refresh cubes. First, as we've seen in Anne's presentation, you can manually click refresh, and that will go back to the database and read the data as of now. There are 2 auto refresh configuration options in Info Explorer. One is to auto refresh when you open the cube, and the other one is while you're using the cube, you can choose to refresh regularly every X number of minutes. You can also use Process Scheduler Level 1 to distribute the cubes, so to refresh them and email them to users. So we'll look at these options in Info Explorer just now. And with Process Scheduler, you need Process Scheduler Level 1. Choose the Refresh Info Explorer Cube action. If your cube has parameters, including a password, you can put that in the schedule as well. And then when the schedule is run, it will refresh the cube. And if you have put in an email to or an email CC, it will then email the cube. And you can configure the email message yourself. So now let's look at that in Info Explorer. So here I'm looking at my AR outstanding balances cube. If I go to the Properties tab and look at my query, the data that is being retrieved from Sage 300, I can tick this box that says refresh automatically on open. So you'll make sure whenever you open the cube, you have the latest data. And this is a good idea if appropriate and if your query doesn't take too long. So you may not want to be refreshing that while users are entering transaction if you've got a really large sales history cube, for example. Then on the auto refresh tab, I have the ability to say, let's refresh every 10 minutes. And if you have a simple cube that is looking at, let's say, orders for today or the list of back orders, and you want to display that on a dashboard that you look at all the time, then this is a really great option. If I want to refresh the cube automatically unattended, I can use Process Scheduler. We won't go through the details of setting up Process Schedulers. There are lots of resources on that on the Orchid website and in the Process Scheduler help. But basically, under your Process Scheduler options, you would configure your email SMTP details. And since 2022, the latest product updates of Process Scheduler support SMTP or Microsoft Graph. And then in your schedule, you're going to click on the detail because it's easier to see what's going on. We'll choose the Refresh Info Explorer Cube action, which is a Process Scheduler Level 1 action. Choose the path where the cube is stored. Enter some parameters optionally, if the cube has parameters. And if I want to email the cube after it's refreshed, I put my email address here. And I can then choose a message ID, which will include, if we want to, the name of the schedule, the description. EXE path is the path where the email is going to pick up the cube from. And this variable called log path is the parameters that I'm passing to the cube. And if I want the cubes to run, I can click run here manually in Process Scheduler, and that will email those 3 cubes. Or I can also configure Windows Task Scheduler to run this completely unattended. And I suggest you refer to the Process Scheduler help for details on how to do that. So I have run that in the background, and I'm seeing here my 3 cubes, order entry, sales history, my AR outstanding balance, and my order action back order report. So this one does not have any parameters, but this one has a parameter where I'm aging as of 2020 July. Next, we're going to look at security tips when using Info Explorer to make sure your data is safe. Under Properties, there are 6 options where you can lock what people can do with a cube. First, if you want the ability to password protect the entire file, you use log file. So a user would need the password to actually open the cube. The cube connects to your database through the connection details. So if you have multiple databases and certain users only view certain databases, you can lock the connection so that they can't change the connection details. You can also lock an individual cube within the file, and that's particularly relevant if you have different queries and different cubes within a single CUBX Info Explorer cube file. And when you do this, it means you need to enter the password before viewing or amending the underlying query. We've just looked at how to refresh the cube. If you don't want users to refresh all the time during business hours, you can lock the refresh and only have a few users with the password who can refresh manually. If you use write back, you can use lock write back to lock the ability to update the budget in the work sets, and write back query, lock write back query to require password before you can update the budget in Sage 300. So let's have a look at this quickly in Info Explorer. So here on properties, these are the different options that we've looked at. You can put a password here. I need to enter the password twice, but remember there is no way to retrieve the password. So if you enter a password, make sure that you save a master copy of your cube without a password somewhere safe for the power user in case something happens and people can't remember the password. And it's the same for all the lock options. You enter your 2 passwords in there. So I'm going to say lock refresh. Say OK. And now if I click refresh, I need to enter the password. If I put the password wrong, getting invalid password. Try again. Put in the right password and it's now refreshing. Next, we're going to look at 2 common support questions. First one is around Query Builder, and the next one is using the application object model for Orchid modules to get some field names if you're writing a new cube on some Orchid modules. So let's look at that in Info Explorer. Look at a very simple AR customer sample cube here. And I think Anna's already shown us how to do that, but let's look at that again. You can click on Query Builder and you see all the fields that are available. I can add the on hold flag, for example. It's going to add it in here. And I can also then add another table and link it back to here. So let's have a look at the EFT customer, for example. I can add it here. And then I'm going to join ARcast and ELcast. And then I can say maybe I want to see the bank name for this customer. If I click on data, I'll see the data that has been retrieved. And when I'm happy with it, I can go File, OK, and refresh the database. So now I can drag the bank name and I can see which customers belong to which bank. Occasionally, when you click Query Builder, you get an error saying invalid select statement. This is a known support issue because sometimes the underlying query can't be rendered by this Query Builder UI. So if you get this error, and it's often because maybe there's a parameter in the query or there are some calculations in the query to convert some fields to different data types. So when that happens, you can't use Query Builder for that cube. What you need to do is go to Properties, the cube, and use the query, the select statement that is in here, copy it, paste it into Query Analyzer, into SQL Management Studio, work through your SQL query in SQL Management Studio, and then paste it back into Sage 300, into Info Explorer. So we want to look at that now. There is detailed video on advanced SQL tips for Info Explorer. So if you're interested in that, I suggest you watch that video. If you have a specific questions on a specific cube, ask us and we can get back to you. Now, the application object model is available for all Orchid modules under the product downloads area when you are logged in to the website. So if we look at version 2023, I can download this zip file. So I've already downloaded that and it's saved here in my Orchid folder under all modules. So we're using a similar tool to the tool that Sage uses for their own application object model. And when you open it, you need to open it with Internet Explorer, or if you don't have Internet Explorer, if you're using Edge, you need to use Edge in Internet Explorer mode. Otherwise you don't see anything. So if I click reload, and allow blocked content, then I can view all the Orchid modules in here. So if I wanted to write a cube on RMA, or as we've done before on EFT customers, I can click on this and look at the fields on EL cust. Or go back and look at RMA, and I can look at my RA head, and I can view details fields with a description. In summary, in today's presentation, we've looked at the forthcoming 64-bit release of Info Explorer, and this is what we've demonstrated in this webinar. We've looked at using, we've touched on using Info Explorer with other Orchid modules. We've demonstrated some analysis tips in filtering, sorting, drill down, adding, calculation, displaying ranks, using styles to format your cubes better, and putting it all together on dashboards. Looked at options to refresh the cubes. Looked at security considerations and some support questions around using Query Builder and Object Model. You can find more details on Info Explorer on the Orchid website, including a lot of the videos that we have referred to in this webinar. And you also have details on the features of each edition. So Info Explorer Lite, the free version, has some restrictions. You can only run the demo cubes. You can't amend the query, you can't create new cubes, and you can't export the cube data. But you can connect the demo cubes to your own data and start doing some analysis. With Info Explorer Standard, you can do all the analysis we've looked at, as well as amending your own query and creating your own cubes. And with Info Explorer right back, you can use the work sets to set up your budgeting and use all the different spread methods for top-down and bottom-up budgeting, like copying your actuals into budget figures, copying budget 1 into budget 2, and increasing by X%. And then finally, with write back, you can update from the cube directly to Sage 300 GL budget or budget stored in Orchid optional tables. Thank you for your time, and we'll now open this webinar for Q&A. Thank you.